Working on the 944 fuel tank. When you take the strainer out, that knurled part is supposed to stay in the tank, but it's stuck to the strainer. So what do you do now? Fortunately, 928's RS has a repair piece that goes in from the inside, but it needs to be ground down to fit the 944 fuel tank, at least on my 87. Let's see how that fits. It also came with a gasket. Had to trim the gasket down. You can see very little material left on the flange there, but when you look into the tank, there's just not a lot of space at the bottom there. To get into the top of the fuel tank, pull your carpet back and you'll see this pad here. All you need is a large pair of pliers or a screwdriver to tap against these tabs. You can unscrew that part, take off your two hoses, pull off the electrical connector, and then your fuel sending unit comes out and you can get into the top of the tank that way. From the top, we're going to lower this part down in. Well, that still didn't fit, so I ground it down a little more, and we're gonna, you can see it's almost flush with the boss that fits through, and we're gonna try it without the gasket this time to see if it can come out a little further, so the threads can hopefully catch. You can see there's not a whole lot of threads on the strainer, so it's got to get quite a bit out there, at least within, get a few threads started. It's got to be within a quarter of an inch of the outer edge of the tank. So we'll drop this in and try it now. I should also mention that I ground down the stopping nub because it seemed like the tank was curving around a little there, and I didn't want it to interfere with that to make it crooked. That's about how far out it's coming right now. It's not quite close enough, and maybe not quite even. I'm using a seal puller to try to pull it out square, but it's really difficult to get the threads engaged. Alright, so we got it quite a bit closer, but it's still not exactly even all the way around. I trimmed a little bit of the edge of that plastic at the opening so it won't interfere. The threads go together okay, but getting them started is tough. There's no taper like on a nut and bolt, so it's hard to get them started. You got to be really square with it. Give it another shot here. All right. That got started, but it's a little crooked, and we want to make sure it's going to seal okay. I don't have the gasket on there right now. Put a socket on that, see if it'll tighten up and square it off a little better. Bit of play in that. I guess we'll have to see if we get the gasket under. Will that work? now it's turning in there. All right, with the gasket this time. Let's see if we can get it started that easily again. Feels like it just turned and the nub went back to the other side. So without overdoing it, I'll squish it a little bit there. Can't tell, but I think that's seating well. May give it another try, and then we'll try a little gas in it. So I put the gasket back on the inside piece, and I think that pushed it off enough to help square it up, and I was able to get it snugged up, and it looks like that gasket on the outside is now compressed all the way around. So hoping that's good to go, but it definitely looks a lot better than it did. We'll see what happens when I get some gas in there. This repair of the tank worked well for me. It has not leaked. Several people told me I could glue the knurled fitting back in with JB Weld, which might have been my choice if the repair sleeve were not available. However, I could not separate the sleeve from the old strainer, and I feel better about having a mechanical connection in there. I did this job after seeing pictures of clogged or disintegrated strainers and thought mine must be due. However, if you simply want to see the condition of the strainer without removing it, you can see most of it by draining the tank, removing the fuel gauge sending unit, and looking down into the tank. Had I known that, I might have left mine in place and avoided this step, though I'm glad I got it done as I wanted to replace all of the filters and hoses, not knowing if they had ever been done before. My fuel sending unit should be fine. My gauge always works right. Here's how it seems to respond. If I put an ohmmeter across these two pins, all the way down, which would be empty, showing 64 ohms. Turn that light on again so you can see it. When I turn it upside down, so when the float goes up for full, it goes to about 3 ohms. And it seems to, as I rattle it downward, it changes. So that looks like it works fine. So we'll go ahead and drop that back in the tank. That way nothing falls in there. Still want to replace my return line. That's going to be next. Seems to want to get into that lower hole in the lowest section of the tank. There it goes. So I think this is a vent line that goes here, and then this is the return line that goes down underneath to the hard line under the car. That's the one we're going to replace. I've heard it's difficult. We're going to maybe try pushing a wire through it, tie it through the other one, and use that as a puller to pull the old one out and the new one in. Probably put some soapy water on it too to help. Looking underneath here, that's our line that comes out of the filter going up to the engine. This one's the return line to the tank. So this is the one we're going to remove down here and replace. And in case you're wondering, it takes a 14 and a 17 millimeter to separate those two. The supply line connection on top came apart easily, and I replaced it with a new OEM hose from the filter. But the return line would not separate no matter how hard I tried, and I didn't want to damage the hard line. So I decided, since it wasn't leaking, I would leave it as is and try removing the hose. I carefully cut away the crimped collar with a Dremel and was able to remove the old hose, leaving a fitting where I could clamp on a new hose. I noticed that the fitting was 10 millimeters despite the return hard line being 8 millimeters. The supply side hard line is also 10 millimeters. Now that the lines and filters by the tank have been replaced, we move up to the engine bay. So this is the Rennbay fuel hose repair kit. These hoses here and here go from the hard lines in the fender well up to the fuel dampener and the fuel pressure regulator. The fuel dampener is turned around so that it allows this hose to go back and stay a little further away from the heat from the header. The fuel supply line routes in about the same spot as the OEM hose line. But the Rennbay kit works really well. It fits right on the fittings up top, and then down inside the fender it has built-in compression fittings that go right onto the hard lines after you cut them. This here is the fuel jumper hose that goes from the fuel rail down underneath into the fuel pressure regulator. That was available as an OEM part from Porsche. While you don't need to remove the fuel rail to replace that jumper hose, it does make it a little easier, but it may not be worth the extra effort. I was also replacing my injectors at the time, so it had to come out anyway. Overall, the job was a success, and I'm glad to have it done. Thanks for watching.